could you sell my lot without my permission?
Community rules, Jack. You should have followed them.
Those rules won't save you when the truth comes out.
The morning the HOA quietly sold my lakefront lot at auction, I was standing on that very ground, coffee steaming in my hands, believing I had finally achieved a lifelong dream. The water shimmered like polished glass, the pines whispered with a gentle breeze, and for a brief moment I thought peace had finally settled over my life. That moment shattered with the shrill ring of my phone and a neighbor's panicked voice, telling me the unimaginable. The Homeowners Association had convened a special session, declared my dues delinquent, completely false, and pushed my beloved property through a backdoor sale without so much as a warning. They had stolen my sanctuary with a smile, and they thought I was powerless. What they didn't know, what made me straighten my shoulders and stare out across the lake with a calmness that bordered on dangerous, was that I had resources they could never imagine and a plan that would turn their arrogance into ashes. The same people who smugly congratulated themselves for ruining me had just set the stage for their own downfall. For years, I had worked 60-hour weeks managing construction projects, scraping and saving for a place where I could fish at dawn and watch the sunset without city noise gnawing at my nerves. This lot wasn't just dirt and timber to me. It was the culmination of decades of sweat, missed birthdays, and hard choices. I had paid every HOA fee on time, even the petty assessments for repainting mailboxes or re-graveling roads that didn't need it. But this HOA board, led by their self-appointed queen, Patricia Langley, had always thrived on intimidation. They wielded bylaws like swords, fining retirees for flowers planted too close to the curb, bullying families over swing sets, and humiliating anyone who dared question their authority. They mistook my polite compliance for weakness. The day before the auction, I had actually run into Patricia at the community market. She'd flashed that practiced, sugary smile while her eyes flicked with calculation, the kind of look predators give when they're already savoring the kill. I remember her manicured hand resting lightly on the handle of her designer bag as she asked innocently whether I'd checked my mail recently. I thought nothing of it at the time. Now, replaying the encounter, I could almost hear the mockery hidden behind her casual tone. They thought I'd show up at the next HOA meeting sputtering with outrage, maybe beg for mercy, and accept some humiliating compromise. They had no clue that, while I loved solitude, I wasn't naive about business or power. That afternoon, while neighbors whispered and speculation buzzed, I dug through my meticulous records and bank statements. Not a single late payment, not a single missed notice. What the board had done was not only underhanded, but legally shaky. Still, I didn't want a drawn-out courtroom brawl that would cost years and lawyers' fees while they sat smug on their porches. I wanted something cleaner, sharper, and undeniably final. As I stared at the deed copies and bylaw pages scattered across my kitchen table, a thought struck like lightning. The HOA had mortgaged portions of community land years ago to fund unnecessary improvements, like the marble sign at the entrance and the overpriced security gate that never worked properly. Those debts were public record. Their arrogance had left them vulnerable. That night, I barely slept. I sat by the lake, moonlight painting the water silver, and pictured the board members sipping wine on their decks, confident that tomorrow they would announce my eviction as a trophy kill. My anger cooled into something more focused, strategy. The next morning, I drove 2 counties over to a discreet real estate investment firm where I still had contacts from my construction days. We pored over tax records and mortgage filings. What we discovered was a spiderweb of over-leveraged loans and balloon payments that the HOA could barely meet even before their legal stunt. If someone quietly bought up those liens and debts, the board would be at the mercy of their new creditor. And auctions, just like the one they'd used to humiliate me, often attract sharks. I was about to become the biggest shark they'd ever seen at BY Sunset. I had arranged financing using assets they didn't even know I owned. I wasn't a billionaire, but decades of careful investing and some profitable land deals had left me with serious firepower. The investment firm acted as an intermediary to avoid tipping off the HOA. Over the next weeks, I began acquiring every scrap of leverage connected to our development, the liens on common areas, the overdue note on the community clubhouse, even a quiet option on a parcel the HOA planned to flip for profit. Each acquisition felt like sliding another chess piece into place. All the while, Patricia and her allies strutted around the neighborhood, gloating about cleaning up our community by getting rid of problem owners. They hosted cocktail parties where they toasted their own cleverness, never realizing the ground was already crumbling beneath them. What made this more than a financial maneuver was the emotion humming beneath every move. This wasn't revenge for a minor slight. This was about defending the principle that bullies don't get to rewrite reality. My lake lot represented years of discipline and dreams, and they had treated it like a pawn in their petty power games. Standing at the edge of the water, I could still see the faint imprint of my dock pilings in the soil, could still imagine grandchildren casting fishing lines from its planks. I promised myself that not only would I reclaim this spot, but I would also dismantle the corrupt little empire that had tried to steal it. The first domino had already tipped, and the rest would follow. Meanwhile, subtle ripples began to spread through the neighborhood. A few residents, those tired of Patricia's reign, started asking questions about the board's finances after hearing rumors of strange transactions. Others noticed surveyors quietly measuring common grounds and wondered why. I said nothing, keeping my expression neutral whenever I passed them on the road. Silence, I'd learned, is often more powerful than threats. Inside, though, anticipation built like a gathering storm. I could almost hear the creak of the trap slowly tightening, and I knew the moment of revelation would be spectacular. The HOA had sold my lot at auction. Soon, without even realizing it, they would hand me the keys to their entire kingdom to eye in the weeks that followed. The board's arrogance only deepened, and every smug glance from Patricia or her cronies strengthened my resolve. The transfer of liens and debts progressed quietly behind the scenes while outwardly, life in the neighborhood continued with barbecues, fishing trips, and the weekly HOA newsletters full of self-congratulation. Patricia sent out an email celebrating the successful reclamation of a delinquent property, crowing about their commitment to maintaining high standards. Reading those words, I felt no anger, only a kind of grim amusement. They had no inkling that their empire of clipped hedges and pastel shutters was now balanced on a financial knife edge, and I was the one holding the blade. The investment firm informed me that by mid-month I would officially control the debts tied to the clubhouse, the boat ramp, and several common parcels. Even the neighborhood's insurance policy was precariously tied to a loan I was quietly buying out. One bad quarter, one delayed payment, and the board would be legally obligated to deal with me. During this time, I deliberately maintained an unthreatening routine. I showed up to HOA meetings sitting quietly in the back row, listening to Patricia rail about minor landscaping infractions. I nodded politely when she bragged about her leadership. The illusion of normalcy lulled them further into complacency. Behind the scenes, I was building a network of allies among the other homeowners. People who had quietly endured fines for mailbox colors or bird feeders, but had been too intimidated to speak out. I let slip to Bob, a retired electrician who had lived there since the development's founding, that the board's debt load was heavier than anyone suspected. Bob spread the word cautiously, and soon the whispers grew louder. A young couple who had been forced to repaint their porch twice approached me with a mix of curiosity and desperation, asking if I thought Patricia's leadership could be challenged. I didn't promise anything yet. Instead, I let the anticipation build, letting them draw their own conclusions about change on the horizon. Meanwhile, I expanded my strategy beyond financial leverage. I commissioned a legal audit of the HOA's actions in selling my lot. The attorney uncovered procedural irregularities, notices sent to incorrect addresses, missing meeting minutes, and unauthorized votes. While the board had technically transferred the deed, the flaws were severe enough to cast doubt on the legitimacy of the auction. The lawyers suggested I could sue to reclaim the lot outright, but a lawsuit would merely restore what was mine. It wouldn't expose their hypocrisy or free the community from their stranglehold. I wanted something more dramatic, something that would make every resident sit up and realize that fear-based power collapses when challenged. The first real sign that my quiet campaign was working came when two minor board members resigned without explanation. Patricia tried to downplay the departures as personal reasons, but murmurs circulated about unpaid invoices and a suspiciously delayed landscaping contract. The HOA's treasurer, a nervous man who always avoided confrontation, began looking pale at meetings, fumbling through financial reports. I knew then that my pressure was beginning to register. I acquired the last piece of leverage in late summer, a controlling interest in the note tied to the neighborhood's private water access lot, the jewel Patricia loved to flaunt at parties. With that, I effectively owned the ground beneath her favorite gathering spot. She could sip champagne on that dock all she wanted, but now she was doing it on land she no longer controlled. Even as my power solidified, I moved with patience. Bullies crumble best when they're given time to overplay their hand, and Patricia's pride was a reliable weapon against her. She scheduled an HOA gala at the clubhouse to celebrate a season of progress, unaware that the building's debt was now held entirely in my portfolio. I attended in a simple jacket, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries while Patricia delivered a speech praising the board's sound financial management. I watched her toast under the twinkle lights, her laughter ringing across the lake, and knew the spectacle would make her eventual fall all the more spectacular. Over the next few days, I finalized legal notifications through my attorney. The HOA would soon learn that their payment schedules had been reassigned to a new creditor, me, and that failure to meet those payments would trigger foreclosure. Clauses on community assets. The ripple effect was immediate. The treasurer called an emergency board meeting 2 mornings later, his voice cracking as he reported that their debts were now controlled by an unknown entity. Patricia brushed him off with an airy wave, insisting it was a routine transfer. But her confidence faltered when she discovered that her calls to the bank went unanswered, and her usual influence produced no explanations. Behind closed doors, panic simmered. I kept my distance, continuing to play the calm, affable neighbor. I strolled the lake path, waved at fishermen, and even complimented Patricia on her garden. The quieter I remained, the more the tension built within the board. By the end of the week, they realized the gravity of their situation. Their funding for community maintenance, their legal reserves, even their insurance policies now hinged on terms they didn't control. And the man they had mocked as powerless was sitting on their future like a hawk perched above a field mouse. Patricia's pride wouldn't let her admit weakness. She pushed ahead with plans for a new round of beautification projects, sending out glossy flyers announcing fee increases to cover unexpected financial adjustments. But homeowners were already on edge, and the whispers about mismanagement grew louder. Several longtime residents approached me quietly, expressing their frustration and readiness for change. I kept my cards close, hinting only that solutions were possible. The board, blind to their own impending ruin, tightened their grip, issuing fines with renewed ferocity, perhaps hoping to compensate for their financial shortfall. It only deepened resentment among the neighbors. The stage was now perfectly set. Patricia had built her throne on borrowed money and fear. All I had to do was pull one thread, and the entire tapestry would unravel before everyone's eyes. As summer faded, and the first whispers of autumn colored the trees around the lake. The tension in our neighborhood became almost tangible, like static before a lightning strike. Patricia continued her facade of control, striding across manicured lawns in designer heels, clutching her clipboard as if it could hold back a tide she didn't even see coming. But behind closed doors, the cracks widened. The HOA board struggled to make minimum payments on debts they no longer understood, and homeowners began to murmur openly about missed maintenance on the boat ramp and the failing clubhouse roof. A few brave souls even confronted Patricia at informal gatherings, asking pointed questions she brushed off with brittle laughter. Every evasion she offered chipped a little more away from her authority. I watched from the periphery, letting her arrogance do the work. Bullies often destroy themselves if given enough rope. That MY attorney advised that the moment was nearly ripe. We had prepared a comprehensive notice package detailing the transfer of all HOA debts to my holding company and the consequences for default. The paperwork was precise and unassailable, supported by every legal requirement the board had once flouted. I reviewed it late at night under the glow of a desk lamp, the pages arranged like a silent army on the table. Each document was a reminder of the sleepless nights I had endured after losing my lot, of the hollow ache I had felt watching strangers trample on decades of sacrifice. The anger had burned away long ago, leaving a cold clarity that made my movements deliberate and exacting. I wasn't acting out of vengeance anymore. I was executing justice, ensuring that those who abused power would be held accountable by their own rules. When the official notifications landed in the board members' mailboxes, the neighborhood's tranquil surface shattered. Patricia's veneer of composure cracked when she realized the loans she had used as leverage for years were now controlled by someone with no intention of playing her game. The treasurer nearly resigned again, calling emergency meetings that grew more frantic by the hour. Rumors spread quickly, carried by neighbors who had once been cowed into silence. People gathered on porches at dusk, speculating about what it meant. Some feared the loss of their homes or community spaces. Others secretly hoped Patricia's reign was finally ending. Through it all, I remained the picture of calm. I attended a community cookout, helping flip burgers while conversations buzzed around me, never hinting that I held the answers everyone sought. The tension worked in my favor. The longer the uncertainty lingered, the more Patricia's credibility eroded. By early October, I quietly arranged to reacquire my original lake lot through a discreet transaction. The party who had purchased it at auction was a small-time investor eager to offload it once he realized the legal issues surrounding its sale. Buying it back felt less like victory and more like restoration. I stood on the familiar soil one crisp morning, the mist curling over the water, and breathed in deeply. The dock pilings I had set years before still bore faint marks from my tools, like echoes of persistence. Yet even as relief washed over me, I knew the story wasn't complete. Simply reclaiming what was mine would leave Patricia free to continue her tyranny over the neighborhood. To truly free the community, the illusion of her power had to be shattered publicly and irreversibly. Prepare the final act. I gathered a coalition of homeowners who were fed up with years of petty fines and humiliation. We met quietly in garages and backyards, comparing stories of overreach. A retired teacher fined for a wind chime. A single mother harassed over the color of her shutters. A veteran threatened with legal action for a flagpole. Each tale hardened our resolve. I laid out the financial documents for them, explaining how the HOA's authority was now built on debts I controlled. They listened wide-eyed as I described the foreclosure clauses and the clauses giving the creditor rights to seize community assets in the event of default. For the first time, they understood that the power Patricia wielded so confidently was a mirage sustained by intimidation and ignorance. The knowledge alone was enough to lift spirits. Neighbors began greeting each other with conspiratorial smiles, their fear giving way to anticipation. Patricia, oblivious to the full extent of the shifting tides, scheduled a grand autumn HOA meeting at the clubhouse, planning to unveil a new round of fee hikes and project proposals to protect property values. She decorated the clubhouse with orange and gold garlands, certain that her charm and bluster would quell any dissent. But her loyalists were fewer now. Several families had already stopped paying their inflated assessments, calculating that any penalty she threatened was hollow. As the date approached, I finalized arrangements with a reputable real estate firm to manage the transition once I exercised my rights over the HOA's assets. The plan wasn't simply to humiliate Patricia. It was to stabilize the neighborhood under fairer, transparent management. My investment partners prepared legal teams to ensure that once the board defaulted, the takeover would be swift, orderly, and beyond contest. The evening of the meeting arrived under a sky streaked with fiery sunset colors that seemed almost prophetic. Cars lined the clubhouse parking lot, headlights sweeping across anxious faces. Inside, residents filled every chair, the air electric with anticipation. Patricia took the podium, still exuding confidence, but there was a brittleness to her smile that hadn't been there before. She began with the usual platitudes about community pride and financial responsibility, then unveiled her proposal for steep new fees. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, sharper and louder than in previous meetings. When she tried to dismiss the concerns as misunderstandings, a neighbor asked bluntly about the debt transfers. Patricia faltered, her voice tightening as she insisted everything was under control. The murmurs grew into open challenges. I remained silent, standing near the side wall, watching as the carefully constructed image of Patricia's authority began to wobble. The moment for revelation was drawing close, and the entire room could feel that something monumental was about to happen. The clubhouse filled with uneasy whispers, and Patricia tried to steady her composure. I stepped forward, my binder of documents held casually but firmly under my arm. I did not need to speak to stir the room. The mere act of walking to the front shifted the air, and suddenly the murmur of conversation faded into a tense silence. I laid the binder on a side table and opened it deliberately, revealing pages stamped and notarized with the weight of legal authority. The crowd leaned forward instinctively, sensing that the balance of power was about to shift. My attorney's certified letters had already notified the board of their debt transfers, but Patricia had kept that fact hidden, hoping to bluff her way through another season. Now, as I placed copies of those notices on the table where everyone could see them, the illusion shattered. Homeowners craned their necks to catch a glimpse, their faces registering shock, realization, and, most tellingly, relief. The entire neighborhood finally understood that the queen they had feared for years had been standing on borrowed ground all along. The board members exchanged nervous glances, and the treasurer looked as though the floor might swallow him whole. Patricia's carefully cultivated smile faltered completely, leaving her face bare and brittle. I did not gloat or grandstand. Instead, I simply explained that every major debt the HOA owed, the clubhouse mortgage, the boat ramp lease, the insurance backing for their common spaces, had been quietly purchased by an investment firm now under my direction. Their pattern of procedural violations and reckless spending had left them vulnerable, and their decision to auction my property had been the catalyst for their undoing. There was no anger in my tone, only a steady clarity that cut through the room like the edge of a blade. I informed them that the HOA had already defaulted on one payment cycle under the new terms, triggering clauses that allowed the creditor, me, to seize controlling interest in all collateralized community assets. The room erupted in gasps, then fell silent again, the weight of the revelation pressing down on every listener. Outside, the autumn wind rattled the clubhouse windows as the reality of the situation sank in. Patricia's long-standing threats of fines and foreclosures evaporated into absurdity in the face of actual legal leverage now wielded by the man they had tried to humiliate. The homeowners began to whisper to one another, and the whispers grew into open discussions, questions about what this meant for their future, about whether they would finally be free from Patricia's micromanagement and petty tyranny. I assured them that their homes and personal lots were not in jeopardy, that my goal was not to punish the community, but to liberate it from a corrupt board. I announced that a transition plan was already in place. The HOA's debts would be restructured, fees reduced to reasonable levels, and a new board elected under fair and transparent rules. The clubhouse, boat ramp, and water access lots, everything Patricia had lorded over them, were now under management that respected the residents rather than exploited them. The transformation in the room was instantaneous. Neighbors who had once spoken in hushed tones around Patricia now sat taller, their shoulders squaring with newfound confidence. Some even began to smile, as if shaking off a long nightmare. Patricia herself looked diminished, her authority drained in a matter of minutes. She attempted to rally, insisting the transfer of debt was irrelevant, but her words rang hollow. The treasurer quietly resigned on the spot, setting his clipboard on a chair and slipping out the side door. Several of Patricia's staunchest supporters avoided her gaze, unwilling to attach themselves to a sinking ship. The vote of no confidence that followed was swift and decisive. Patricia was removed as HOA president, stripped of the power she had abused for years. The room buzzed with applause and laughter, cathartic, joyous sounds that echoed off the clubhouse walls. Over the following weeks, the neighborhood transformed. I reinstated my reclaimed lake lot, rebuilding a modest dock with stronger pilings and sturdier boards. Children skipped stones along the waterline again without parents worrying about citation letters. Bob, the retired electrician, helped install new lights at the boat ramp, and for the first time in years, volunteers rather than enforcers handled community projects. The air seemed lighter. Conversations at the mailboxes turned friendly instead of cautious. Patricia moved quietly out of the neighborhood a month later, her for sale sign a silent testament to the impermanence of ill-gotten power. Word spread quickly beyond our small lakeside development about how a tyrannical HOA had been undone by its own arrogance. People from nearby communities reached out, curious and emboldened, eager to learn how to challenge similar bullies in their own neighborhoods. One crisp morning not long after the takeover, I stood at the end of my rebuilt dock, a steaming mug of coffee warming my hands as sunlight spilled gold across the rippling water. The lake was silent except for the distant call of a loon and the soft lapping of waves against the pilings. This place, once threatened by greed and pettiness, was mine again, not just as a parcel of land, but as a symbol of resilience and resolve. I thought of the long nights spent combing through bylaws and bank statements, of the moment I had decided that fear would no longer dictate my life. Power, I realized, only exists where people consent to it. When that consent is withdrawn, even the loudest bully becomes nothing more than another neighbor shouting into the wind as the breeze ruffled the water's surface. I felt a deep, satisfying peace settle over me. The HOA had sold my lake lot at auction, certain they had defeated me. Instead, their arrogance had handed me the keys to their kingdom. I had not just reclaimed what was mine. I had freed an entire neighborhood from a reign of fear. And in doing so, I had reminded everyone within earshot of that lake that standing firm, even when your knees are shaking, can topple the mightiest of paper crowns. The lake glimmered brighter than ever that morning, a quiet witness to the simple truth that justice, though sometimes delayed, has a way of returning home.